Can physical comedy help take your comedy to the next level? Hi, Jerry Corley, standupcomedyclinic.com with another episode of Ask the Joke Doctor. In this episode, we're going to be discussing physical comedy and whether or not physical comedy can help you take your comedy to the next level. Here's an interesting story. About 2 years ago, a couple of my students were opening for Bill Burr at Flappers Comedy Club here in Burbank. And here's the stark difference between Bill Burr and other comics. Bill Burr is a comics comic. What I mean by this is like 2 weeks before Bill Burr came in town, Chris Kattan, you may have heard that name from Saturday Night Live. Chris Kattan is one of the players on SNL. And when he was in town performing, nobody else was allowed in the green room. So nobody was allowed in there. But 2 weeks later, Bill Burr, a much bigger name in comedy, was in town. And Bill Burr just sat in the green room with the comics. So he's a comic. Not only that, he asked them questions about how they got into comedy. And then one of the things he shared with the comedians was really great insight into comedy. He said he realized he was able to take his comedy to the next level. He really thought he figured it out when he started to add act-outs in his comedy. Now, act-outs are basically physicality of something you have set up as a comedian as you're telling a story. You set an idea up and you act that out. With Bill Burr, he does kind of a joke about something and he acts it out. He has a joke about, that's why a dick could never be a third base coach. Because if he was a third base coach, he'd be waving everybody in, So basically he's adding that act out as part of the setup with a lot of analogy. He does is-likes and then he does the act out. Robin Williams built his whole career out of taking two dissimilar ideas, converging them with an is-like or an analogy, and then acting that out. That's not the only place you can put in act-outs. You can put in act-outs in other situations. What I like to use is what I call the act-out sandwich. That's basically tell us what you're going to do it, and then tell us what you just did with some tags and toppers. So it's sort of like the education sandwich. I call it the act-out sandwich. So you set up something, and then you act it out. For example, if I was to talk about, say something like, everybody in Texas says y'all. I mean, you go to certain parts of the country, you'll have pockets of the population say y'all, but everybody in Texas says y'all. I mean, they have 3 levels of y'all. They'd be like, talking to one person, be like, how y'all doing? Right? If I'm talking to 2 people, how y'all's doing? If I'm talking to the whole room, it's like, how's all y'all's doing? So it's like 3 levels of y'all. So that's a little mini act out, but I continue the story. It's like, but everybody in Texas says y'all. I was at a very expensive French restaurant in Dallas at the top of this hotel, which is a joke in itself. So I'm at the top of this hotel, and this very austere French waiter comes up to the table. It's like, good afternoon, mademoiselle. I mean, he was really French. He's got the towel on his arms, he's got the little tiny mustache, he's got the accent, He comes up to the table. He's like, good afternoon, mademoiselle, monsieur. Welcome to Café Le Bon. What can I get for y'all? It's like, wow, you just blew the attitude there, the atmosphere there, Pierre, right? So basically out of that, it was carried through with an act out. But I set it up almost to the point where there was no surprise. I gave away the joke. But the surprise comes in the actual waiter doing the act out and saying y'all. So that's one way of doing it in a story. Now, the key with act-outs is that act-outs should be authentic, or as some people are calling it, organic. It should be a natural flow as part of the material you're talking about. Now, and a lot of people confuse act-outs and they think, oh, I got to do something physical, so they flop around on stage or they do a big, huge pratfall. That's not necessarily what act-outs are. They can be very subtle, So you can just do it as just a general conversation. You're just saying the words somebody else might be saying. Does this make sense? If you want to see really good physical comedy, see in sitcoms, this kind of physical comedy is called slapstick. In stand-up, it's just called an act out. So, but the physical comedy is very important that you don't play the gag, but you play the goal. Let me explain. If you watch Jason Bateman is an excellent actor at doing physical comedy. In Arrested Development, he does a scene where the setup is their company basically sells homes, right? And they've got these model homes, but they're broke now, and so they're living in one of their model homes. Now, the quality of workmanship is not very good. So at one point, the living room sinks in this model home. So Jason Bateman is sitting there eating a cereal one morning, watching CNBC and watching the stock, and he sees the stock price of his company, his father's company, goes up a nickel. And he basically says, you see that when you create a good product, it's just a matter of making sure that, and he continues to play the goal of finishing that sentence as opposed to playing the fall. He didn't go, whoa, and flop around on the floor. He just happened on his way of making a point, hitting that obstacle, falling out of frame, then getting back up and continuing on. We've seen the same move if you watch Miss Congeniality with Sandra Bullock. Sandra Bullock is basically, she's an FBI agent, and there's some mysterious stuff going on in this beauty pageant thing. So she actually goes undercover, becomes a beauty pageant contestant, and she went from being a tomboy to a really good-looking lady who's now all dressed up, and she's wearing pumps, and her first reveal after she dresses up and looks ready for the pageant, she starts walking down this aisle past her coworkers, her male coworkers, and acting like she's all that, right? And doing the sort of the scissored gait with her walk, and then stumbles on a heel, falls out of frame, pops right back up, I'm okay, and continues on her destination of what her goal is. But if she played that fall, it wouldn't have been as funny. As audiences, we love to be fooled, but we hate to be made fools of. So just remember that. Play the goal, not the fall. So that's basically how you execute physical comedy. My dad used to call it playing under the comedy. So I had a student in class, we were talking about slapstick or physical comedy, and he did this cool thing. He says, you know, in Europe, they actually play the Paralympics, not just the Olympics, but they play the Paralympics. That's when the differently abled people get to do their athletics for competition, and they keep it on TV on prime time. He said, I got to watch some of that Summer Olympics for the Paralympics. My favorite was the high dive. And then he just brought this chair, he had this chair up on stage, he slides it forward to the edge of the stage and just rolls forward off the stage. Now, fortunately, the stage is only like 7 inches high, so it wasn't a big fall, but that was his gag. And he just did it without saying anything, just rolled off the stage. We fell out of our seats laughing. That kind of playing under the comedy and staying serious to the goal of the diver diving off a high dive was hysterical. And the idea that somebody would be in a wheelchair doing a high dive, you know, is just a great juxtaposition. But he had to play it straight, as a real diver might do this in the Olympics. If you try to play the fall, then it's just not going to work. The audience feels like you made fools of them. They don't feel fooled. So that's another example of physical comedy. Physical comedy can be in your storytelling. Your storytelling can be like, for example, I was in Louisville, Kentucky. I was doing a show, and I was there for 3 weeks in Louisville, Kentucky. I got arrested. Evidently, I tried to smuggle in some grammar, and I was guilty. But after the show, this club manager wanted to take me and this other comedian to the strip club. Now, I've been to strip clubs before, but strip clubs in Louisville, Kentucky, come on. These were the ugliest strippers I had ever seen in my life. I mean, I'm thinking as a stripper, your body should be in some sort of shape, and not the shape of a rhombus. I figure rhombus is easier to say than an obtuse angled equilateral parallelogram, you know, which is the definition of rhombus. But these gals, they had no rhythm. Like the music's going, and these girls were like, and you're trying to help them. You're like, come on, Ellie Mae, find the beat. 2, 4, 2, 4, nothing doing, right? And there was like, what was weird was, you know, I was sitting at the end of this like runway thing, you know, and they get up there, and they make a beeline right for the bald guy, you know. It's like they were like, maybe it's the light shining off our foreheads into their eyes. They're like, oh, follow the light, follow the light. And we're coming right towards me. And there were dudes on the side with money in their teeth going, Ellie Mae over here. But they're coming to me. And I'm like, oh, no. And it's like, you know, these girls were not in great shape. And it's like one looked like she had a C-section but was never pregnant. You know, you follow me? Yeah, it was like a smiley face with a goatee. So she comes up to me and she goes, hi, my name's Peaches. And I'm thinking fuzzy fruit at this point, right? And I said, hi, how you doing? Nice to meet you. And she turns around and puts her butt in my face. I mean, what kind of manners is that? And then she slaps it. I mean, is that supposed to be hot? Not on her, because it's going, you know. And it's like, so she's like, she actually says to me, hey, have you ever seen a nicer ass? And I'm like, hey, honey, I've seen nicer asses pulling a plow. You know, who are you, Eeyore? Hey, folks, come on in. It's Winnie the Pooh. Oh, we have Kanga and Roo. That explains the pouch. She's a marsupial. Who knew? Now, I didn't say that. I just smiled and looked at her ass. But you see, during this story, that whole story was driven by character act-outs. I was just doing the characters as how I remember them in telling the story. But by doing the story, you add a new dimension. You add another dynamic. You pattern disrupt, and it makes the story more compelling, more interesting. There's superiority at play. There's recognition at play. We've seen people like this. We've heard people like this, and we can feel superior to them because they're saying dumb shit. So that's kind of the concept. But I'm not, you know, playing this big old huge act out. I'm just playing the characters as authentically as I can based on how I remembered them. So that's my insight right now. It's just a small snippet of the ideas I have about physical comedy. So if you want to do physical comedy, but make sure you keep in mind to play the goal, not the gag, and make sure your act-outs are as authentic as you can make them, not, you know, wacky zany, all right? Because that means you're making fools out of the audience and not fooling the audience. So I hope this little segment on physical comedy helped you out in some way. I hope it brought some value to your day. If you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter. My handle is @JokeDoctor. And ask the question and then hashtag it with Ask the Joke Doctor, and I'll be happy to put a small video like this together to help answer your question and help you evolve in your comedy journey. Remember, I do this, I just love to do this. I mean, comedy's my life 24/7. So any way I can help you, I'd be happy to. Take care. Once again, don't forget, if you like these videos, don't forget to subscribe. I'd love to see more of you. Take care. Bye-bye.